Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of All Politics Are Local. I'm WSAV Now reporter John Dowding. Every week, we take the time to break down those big headlines coming out of DC to see how it impacts us right here in the coastal empire in Low Country. And as always, we're being joined by WSAV Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer, back in the newsroom again for a second week in a row. I mean, there's a lot going on, so it's probably the best place to be right now.
No, absolutely. And it definitely has been both, a historic and busy week. Just getting back into it and jumping right in on this Monday morning.
Yeah, you've been up all morning updating all the X Star stations across the country about the events of this weekend. And obviously, we're going to start off there. We see Trump was acquitted for the second time. A lot of conversations around that, not only conversations around the acquittal period, but also conversations around Republicans who voted to convict him. So we saw 7 Republicans come out to convict him. Some surprises also in those ranks. And then we heard this speech from Mitch McConnell right afterwards, basically condemning the former president, and although he voted to acquit him. So a lot of things going on this weekend. Kelly, just walk us through impeachment and the final days, the final steps towards it. Saturday, I was working here for us here at WSAV, and I saw there was one part where we thought this was going to get delayed even more because of the call for witnesses, and then
Yeah.
it totally flipped around. And you were live tweeting the whole thing, and I could barely keep
Yeah.
up. I don't know how you were keeping up live tweeting the whole thing, but
Yeah.
walk us through your tweets. What was going on? Walk us through that final day of the proceedings.
Yeah, well, basically, we were talking with our senators throughout the week. They were stopping by our camera in the Russell Rotunda, as they were going through this trial. And for many of them, really on both sides, they, wanted to show that for Democrats that they could, go through this trial, but they also still were focusing on COVID relief. And then you had Republicans who just wanted to get it over with. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott said, when I asked him if this was going to be over on Saturday, he said, I pray it will be over on Saturday. And then it was. And as you mentioned, there was a last minute call for witnesses. They even went as far as to, vote to bring in witnesses and pass that. So then when they broke to discuss whether they were going to do it or not, they ended up coming back and ultimately saying, let's just vote and have the final vote in this and go with, ending the trial. And I think because Democrats knew at the end of the day, they did not have the votes they needed to convict the former president. And they also said that, we want to go ahead with COVID relief. We also want to go ahead with confirming President Joe Biden's cabinet picks. The lead impeachment manager, Jamie Raskin, came out. They had a press conference here on Saturday, excuse me, and said, we could have brought out 5,000 witnesses and it wouldn't have made a difference in the mind of Mitch McConnell or others. They felt that this was unconstitutional because former President Trump was former President Trump. He was no longer in office when this vote came up. But that is also something Democrats brought up. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, well, we voted to impeach in the House on January 13th. It was then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell who delayed the start of the trial until after Biden took office. So there was some question there as well, going into, as you mentioned, McConnell coming out with that condemnation of Trump on the Senate floor, despite voting to acquit. I hope I gave you the Spark Notes version, but there's definitely more to say.
No, there's definitely a lot more to say about everything that went on. I think you bring up some great points and some great highlights of the conversations around the whole trial, of the fact of him not being in office anymore, but he was impeached when he was in office, and then the conviction with an impeachment, if someone is found guilty, is to be removed from office. So even if he was found guilty, you couldn't remove him from office, but then there's that conversation of preventing him from running again in the future, which honestly is still something that's on the table because he's facing legal issues in New York and Georgia and a number of other states as well. So, I mean, that's going to just come up in the next couple of days. But I think the biggest point too, that, and you brought this up as well, that a lot of senators on both sides of the aisle were talking about, was this need for working on the goals of this new administration, of focusing on the multiple crises we have going on here in the country, of COVID, of the economic crisis, and trying to get kids back in school, and all of these other issues, food insecurity that's going on across the country. And I think that's what a lot of senators wanted to focus on, aside from this impeachment trial. And other thing I wanted to comment on that you said too was talking about, even if they brought in witnesses, it wasn't going to change anyone's minds. I think you and I said this last week at the very beginning of the trial that most of those senators' minds were made up, except for those select few 7 Republicans who voted to convict him. But I think, like you said, most of those people saw it as a waste of time. Most of the senators saw it as a waste of time. Their minds were made up. They wanted to align themselves with the former president because of his base. Obviously, his base not only got him in office, we got a lot of these senators in office as well. So they're trying to be careful. But I think it's just going to bring up a lot of. I think we're starting to see greater divisions right now in the Republican Party. Nationally, obviously, we're seeing them, but we're also seeing them in individual states. I know we're seeing it a lot here in Georgia, all across the board. But I mean, the biggest thing I want to just focus in on to bring up those big points is just getting back to Biden's agenda, the Biden administration's agenda, because there's so much going on that they want to get done.
Mhm. Yeah, and it was interesting going through some of that. Senator Durbin had said, we are actually on a scheduled recess this week, so we could have continued with it if we wanted to, but then, and again, as you mentioned, the votes, they didn't have the votes to do this. It's interesting. One of those surprise votes was North Carolina Senator Richard Burr, and now the North Carolina State GOP is going to hold an emergency meeting on Monday night to decide whether they're going to vote to censure him. They already did that at the Louisiana Republican state party there, did that to Bill Cassidy after he voted to convict the former president as well. So as we discussed, moving into today, what are some of the repercussions following that vote this weekend? But yeah, as you mentioned, I think we're moving forward. President Biden did give a statement on Saturday. He's mostly left this in the hands of the Senate and in Congress, but he did say some of his final thoughts on this and just said basically, okay, let's move forward. We want to avoid, we want to defend democracy, avoid lies. We got to work together, come together. Much of what he's been saying all along and throughout his campaign. He will begin some of his first his first trips this week. So we'll see how Washington regroups, really. But right now, the Senate and the House are both back in their home states, meeting with constituents following this vote. Interesting to hear what they hear from their constituents there. And then the House is doing committee work on the next COVID relief bill, so that is in the works right now.
And I was speaking about that COVID relief bill, looking at the timeline for that. Like you said, right now, Senate is on recess. So once they come back, I think they want. I know the president wants to try and get this bill passed before March 14th, because that's when federal protections for employment will end, for jobs for the unemployed will end. So they're trying to push that bill through by then, but that's 3 weeks away. He's got a lot of negotiations done and out of the way, and obviously it's in committee right now, like you said, in the House, trying to put it together and develop more of the nitty gritty details before they can pass it along to the Senate if it passes the House, which it probably will. But they don't have much time to do this.
Exactly. And, when they get back, as we said, they're still working on it through the committees. Talked with some of the Democrats in the House last week that we're in, hours long meeting working on what's going to go into this bill. Republicans I talked to in the House said they haven't been included in some of these discussions. So there's that going forward as well. And, they do have their work cut out for them. We just made it through, obviously, this massive impeachment trial and this historic trial here on Capitol Hill. And then they're going to enter and come back into this next huge hurdle they face with trying to craft this massive $1.9 trillion relief package, all in a matter of just a few weeks.
And what have you been hearing from some of our local lawmakers? I know you said you had spoken with Tim Scott from South Carolina a couple days ago about the impeachment trial and how it's impacted this push to try to get COVID relief out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we could play a little bit here from our interview with him.
One of the most important things we could be doing on behalf of the American people is making sure that the kids are back in school, making sure that the logistics around the vaccinations have been finished, completed, and executed, and also making sure the fact that small businesses who are in desperate need of a lifeline, that they receive that lifeline. We're not doing any of the priorities of the American people today. We are relitigating the past when we should be focused on the present and the future.
But yeah, he was basically just saying that the trial had already delayed the relief for them being in it just those 5 days last week and then coming back. And if they continued, it would have delayed it even further. Senator Schumer had a different view and he joined Senators Ossoff and Warnock from Georgia and discussed how, and I asked him, I said, is this delaying the trial in any way, or is the trial delaying relief in any way, rather? And he said, no, we are still full force. And that's why he held that press conference with the Georgia senators to show, because they're here, we're able to continue to work and deliver on the promises we made about getting COVID relief, about getting stimulus checks, helping families. So they outlined some of those on Thursday. But it's definitely going to be a challenge to figure out exactly all that gets in there as they kind of decide how much the checks will be, or who's going to get one, as well as is there going to be a $15 minimum wage increase. There's definitely things they have to decide, and there's even divisions between the Democratic Party on some of those things, as well as the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there with the press conference last week with Schumer and the two Georgia senators, because like you said, there's so much that came down to Georgia in this election cycle, and we're really seeing that play out right now in Washington, seeing just how influential the state's elections were this year. And
Absolutely.
Democrats not only over the hurdle, barely over the hurdle, I should add, but getting them having them able to pass things and get legislation pushed through just because they have the sheer majority power in Congress. But thank you so much, Kelly, as always, for speaking with us. We covered a lot of stuff over the last week. Obviously, impeachment is over, and I'm sure we're going to just be focused on COVID the next couple weeks. What else is popping up that we should be aware of that you know of?
Well, we'll just be following COVID really from here, and also the fallout for some of those members who voted to convict the president. Some of those states I cover here. So, but like I said, with the Senate and House out, it will be a little bit quieter here in Washington, but they will be back, and it will be very busy for sure to come next week.
And you will be very busy as well, I'm sure of it. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being with us this week.
Thank you.
As always, you can see more of Kelly's stories and the rest of our team from Washington, all of their stories on our website. Just go to wsav.com/Washington. You can catch up on previous episodes of All Politics Are Local on our website as well. Just go to wsav.com/allpoliticsarelocal. Thank you so much again for watching. I'm John Dowding. We'll see you again next week on All Politics Are Local.